Sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones who throw us away. Sometimes the things that break us lead us straight to the ones who'll finally see us whole. In the rugged outlands of Dustwater Ridge, a father named Thomas Mayfield dragged his pregnant, obese daughter, Clara, into the dirt and handed her off to a man twice her size. A giant cowboy named Weston Blackridge. People said it was punishment. They said it was the end of her story. But they were wrong. Because Weston didn't see shame when he looked at Clara. He saw strength. He saw someone worth loving. And for the first time in her life, Clara was safe. The morning air in Dustwater Ridge was already dry and bitter by the time Thomas Mayfield kicked open the front door of his old ranch house. "Get out here, Clara," he shouted, his voice rough from years of chewing tobacco and louder from years of disappointment. "Don't make me say it twice." Inside, Clara Mayfield, 20 years old and heavy with child, tried to pull her faded green dress over her swollen belly. The fabric clung too tightly to her hips, but it was the only dress that still fit. Her cheeks burned with a mix of shame and fear. Her fingers trembled as she tied the single knot under her chest. She didn't look in the mirror, hadn't in weeks. Not since her father had stopped speaking to her except to spit accusations or bark orders. Not since her mother died and left her alone in this world with a man who now saw her as nothing more than a disgrace. She stepped out onto the porch, blinking against the sun. Her father stood there, his arms crossed, black hat casting a shadow over his lined face. "You ready?" he asked. Clara's lips parted. "Where are we going?" Thomas didn't answer. He just turned and walked toward the old cart hitched to a mule. Clara followed, waddling slightly under the weight of her body and the child she carried. Her stomach pressed against the seams of her dress. Her hands instinctively cupped it, protective, unsure. They rode in silence. The mule's hooves clopped steadily on the dirt road as prairie winds blew past them. Clara watched the horizon. Dry hills. Scattered fences, a hawk circling above. Then, a silhouette emerged ahead. A man, a giant. Even from a distance, he looked unnatural, like he didn't quite fit with the rest of the world. Bare-chested, standing like a stone pillar beside a wooden fence. Muscles cut like they'd been carved by blade, arms the size of fence posts. A wide-brimmed cowboy hat shadowed his face, but she could feel his gaze before she saw it. Then, a silhouette emerged ahead. A man. A giant. Even from a distance, he looked unnatural, like he didn't quite fit with the rest of the world. Bare-chested, standing like a stone pillar beside a wooden fence. Muscles cut like they'd been carved by blade, arms the size of fence posts. A wide-brimmed cowboy hat shadowed his face, but she could feel his gaze before she saw it. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Weston Blackridge. The giant cowboy the town whispered about. They said he broke horses with his bare hands. That he once killed a mountain cat with nothing but a shovel. That no woman ever stayed more than a week on his ranch. Her father pulled the cart to a stop. Thomas climbed down and walked straight up to the cowboy. "You still good on the deal?" he asked. Weston said nothing at first, just looked at Clara. She froze, not knowing where to put her hands. Her dress clung to every inch of her. She imagined what he saw, rolls of flesh, swollen ankles, a face too soft and round, eyes too timid to meet his. But Weston didn't flinch. His jaw shifted slightly. He said, his voice low, deep as distant thunder. Thomas turned back and waved her forward. Clara sat frozen in the cart. "I said come on," he barked. She looked at her father, then at Weston. Her hands shook again. "Don't make a fool of me now," Thomas hissed. Clara climbed down, one leg at a time, carefully lowering her body onto the dry ground. Dust clung to her worn shoes. Thomas grabbed her by the wrist, tugged her forward like a sack of grain. She nearly stumbled but caught herself. Weston watched, unmoving. "This girl," Thomas said, placing her in front of the cowboy like she was livestock, "ain't got nowhere else to go. Don't ask questions." Don't come back crying. She's yours now." Clara's breath caught. The words stung like slaps. She turned toward Weston, barely able to lift her chin. I don't know how to cook," she whispered. "Or clean much. I'm not good at things." Weston stared at her for a long moment. His arms crossed. His chest rose slowly with breath. Then, finally, he said, "You don't need to be." Thomas let out a scoff. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he muttered, turning back to the cot. "She's your problem now." And with that, her father left her. No goodbye. No look back. Just the sound of the cart wheels creaking down the road until the dust swallowed him. Clara stood in silence, unsure whether to cry or fall. The wind tugged her dress. Her knees trembled. For a moment, the shame swallowed her whole. Then, Weston moved. He stepped past her slowly, opened the wooden gate, and motioned toward the small cabin beyond. "You'll stay there," he said simply. Clara followed him through the gate, her hands pressed under her belly. Inside the cabin, it smelled like cedar and earth. Clean, lived in, but not cluttered. One room, one bed, a table, a fire that crackled low. Weston pointed to a small couch near the window. "You can rest there." She sank into it without a word, the cushion groaning beneath her weight. He walked to the stove, poured her a cup of water, and set it gently on the table beside her. Then he turned to leave. Before he reached the door, Clara finally asked, voice shaking, "Why did you agree to take me?" Weston paused, his hand on the doorframe. He didn't turn around, because someone needed to. And then he walked out, into the sun and dust, while Clara sat there, heart pounding, wondering what kind of man she'd just been given to, and why he hadn't looked at her like she was a burden. Not even once. Clara didn't sleep much that night. She sat curled on the couch beneath a scratchy wool blanket, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other clutching the edge of the fabric, like it might anchor her to the world. The quiet was so deep it almost rang in her ears, a strange kind of silence she'd never known back home, where shouting and slammed doors were part of daily life. Outside, crickets chirped in the distance. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Weston hadn't said another word to her after he left. She didn't know where he'd gone. Maybe to a barn. Maybe to sleep under the stars. She didn't know what kind of man he was. Not yet. But he hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't called her names. And he hadn't looked at her with disgust. That alone was more kindness than she'd seen in months. By morning, Clara had drifted into a light doze, but the smell of biscuits and bacon roused her from sleep. Her eyes fluttered open to soft daylight spilling through the cabin's single window. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Her father hadn't let her take a single bite before dragging her off the ranch. She sat up, blinking, adjusting to the light. That's when she saw him, Weston, standing at the wood stove, wearing a plain white shirt now, sleeves rolled up, massive hands working a skillet with practiced ease. A second plate already rested on the small wooden table, eggs, biscuits, thick slices of bacon, a cup of water, a folded napkin. He didn't glance over at her, didn't bark orders or ask questions. He just said quietly, "You can eat if you want." Clara blinked. She hadn't expected a plate. She hadn't expected warmth. But her body moved before her mind caught up. Slowly, cautiously, she pushed herself off the couch and waddled to the chair. She sat down, knees pressing wide beneath the weight of her belly. "Thank you," she murmured, cheeks burning. Weston still didn't look at her. He simply gave a small nod and returned to the stove. Clara took a bite. Then another. The food was simple, but warm, and good. She hadn't tasted biscuits like these since her mother passed. She held back tears. Halfway through the meal, Weston finally sat across from her with his own plate. For the first time, she could really see his face. It was rough-hewn, square jaw, stubbled cheeks, a scar near his temple, His eyes were dark and unreadable, but not cold, not unkind. He didn't stare. He didn't even seem curious. Just calm. Clara found herself blurting out a question before she could stop it. "You live out here alone?" Weston chewed slowly, then swallowed. "I do." "For how long?" "Since I buried my pa. 4 winters back." Clara lowered her gaze. "Sorry." Weston nodded. "He wasn't a kind man, but he taught me to work, build, survive." She looked at her plate, unsure what to say. Weston finally asked, "How far along are you?" Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. 7 months. He nodded again. "You got pain?" "Some. Not too bad yet." "You can rest here as long as you need," he said simply. Clara's throat caught. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," he said. "You're carrying life. You've been hurt. That's enough." Clara blinked fast, not ready to cry again. Not in front of him. Later that day, Weston went out to chop firewood. Clara watched him from the porch. His broad back moved with each swing of the axe. Sweat glistened across his neck. Each strike echoed like a drumbeat into the open sky. She wasn't sure why, but she felt safe watching him. Her body still ached. Her ankles swelled badly by afternoon, but Weston brought her a pair of boots that were softer than her worn ones and a basin of warm water. Without a word, he set it down near the porch, then disappeared. Clara soaked her feet. The water turned cloudy with dust. That night, he gave her the bed. "You can't sleep on a couch that size with a belly like that," he said. "But where will you?" "I built this place with my own hands. I'll manage." He spread a blanket on the floor near the fireplace, lay down without complaint, and said nothing more. Clara lay in the bed for hours, staring at the wooden ceiling above her, belly tight, heart even tighter. A week passed. Then 2. And something began to shift. Weston didn't ask about the baby's father. He didn't press about the scars hidden behind Clara's softness, the wounds left by her father's rage, her town's shame, and the whispers she'd grown up hearing. Instead, he let her sit beside him while he carved fence posts. He showed her how to mend leather straps and boil herbs for pain. He added more cushions to the porch rocker so she could sit more comfortably and told her where the extra woodpile was, in case I'm out and it gets cold. Clara found herself speaking more each day. About her mother. About the way her hands used to smell like lemon soap, and how she braided Clara's hair before church. She talked about the fields behind their house where she used to hide after school, pretending she was someone else, someone pretty, someone wanted. And Weston listened. Always listened. Never judged. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in gold, Clara sat in the rocker, belly rising under her dress, and Weston stood fixing the porch rail beside her. She cleared her throat. "Do you think," her voice faltered, "do you think a girl like me could be a good mother?" Weston didn't look up, but he answered without hesitation. "I think the ones who've been hurt the worst often love the deepest." She looked down at her swollen hands. Weston added, "You already protect that child like she's gold. That's what matters." "She," Clara whispered. Weston gave the faintest smile. "Just a hunch." Clara looked out at the hills, and for the first time in months, her heart didn't feel like a bruised fruit barely holding together. It felt like something beginning. The days at Weston's ranch began to fall into a quiet rhythm. Clara would wake slowly, her body heavy but less tense. Her ankles still ached, and her belly grew heavier with each passing morning, but her heart felt lighter. There were no harsh words, no slammed doors, no side glances filled with judgment. Just the soft creak of the cabin floorboards, the distant whistle of wind through the grass, and the steady presence of a man who said little but made her feel seen. Every evening, Weston would chop wood or work the fence while Clara watched from the porch, her swollen feet propped up on a stool he built just for her. Sometimes he'd bring her a small handful of wildflowers without saying a word. She'd place them in a chipped jar on the windowsill, where the light caught the petals and made the cabin feel like a home. And every night, after she was settled in the bed and he stretched out by the fireplace, she would whisper, "Thank you." He never answered out loud. But some nights, in the silence, she'd hear him shift and murmur back, "You're welcome." It wasn't until the third week that Weston said something that truly unraveled her. It was after supper, fried potatoes and baked beans, when Clara shyly stood from the table, wiping her hands on her dress. "I feel useless here," she admitted, eyes on the wooden floor. "You do everything. You feed me. You give me shelter. I just sit and get bigger." Weston leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his massive chest. "You're growing a life," he said. "That's work I can't do." Clara gave a weak smile. "Still, I wish I could help." Weston nodded toward the porch. "Come tomorrow. I'll show you the herbs we dry for the cattle. You've got gentle hands. Might do better than me." She blinked. Gentle hands. She hadn't heard herself described with a kind word in. She couldn't even remember. "Okay," she whispered. The next morning, Weston showed her how to tie bundles of dried yarrow, how to separate wild chamomile for teas that helped calm stomachs. Clara's fingers moved carefully, and Weston stayed close, answering questions, occasionally brushing dust from her arm without a single flinch. In town, men wouldn't touch her, not even bump into her by accident. But Weston touched her like it was the most natural thing in the world, like her skin didn't shame him. Later that day, while she was resting inside, she heard the sound of hooves. She pulled herself upright and peered out the window. A man on horseback was approaching. Broad hat, tan duster, boots caked in trail mud. Clara's stomach tightened. Strangers always meant risk. Weston stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. The rider stopped near the gate and leaned slightly forward. "Blackridge," he called. "Heard you took in a girl. That true?" Weston's voice was calm. "What I do on my land ain't up for gossip." The rider laughed. "Folks say she's that fat Mayfield girl, the one who got herself knocked up." Clara froze. She didn't realize her hand had risen to her belly. "Some say you got a soft spot for broken things," the man went on. Weston stepped closer to the gate, his shadow falling long across the dirt. "You rode out here," he said quietly, "just to run your mouth." The man tilted his head. "Just saying, if you're raising another man's bastard, might as well charge folks to see the show." There was a pause. Then, without warning, Weston gripped the top rail of the wooden fence and ripped it free with a single, brutal pull. The man's horse reared slightly. "You done?" Weston asked, voice like distant thunder. The rider held up both hands in mock surrender, turned his horse, and rode off, laughing to himself. Weston watched until the dust settled, then turned and saw Clara standing in the doorway, her face pale. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to cause." Weston raised one hand to stop her. Not harshly, gently. "You didn't cause anything," he said. "He came here to pick a fight. Not with you. With me." Clara's eyes filled. "That's what they think of me." "They are wrong. You don't even know my whole story." "I don't need to." That night, Clara cried silently into the pillow, not because she was sad, but because someone had stood up for her without being asked. No one had ever done that before. By the fourth week, Clara had taken to humming softly while folding linens. Her face glowed more, and Weston noticed, even if he didn't say a word. One day, she caught him looking at her longer than usual as she stood in the sun near the porch railing, dress fluttering against her legs, one hand on her belly. She looked away, flustered, but something in her stirred. She wasn't small. She wasn't pretty. She wasn't the kind of woman men lingered on. And yet Weston's gaze didn't feel like pity. It didn't feel like tolerance. It felt real. That night, she left a folded cloth near his bedding by the fire. She'd stitched it herself, uneven, clumsy work, but made from scraps she'd found in the cupboard. On the edge, she had sewn a little W. She didn't expect him to acknowledge it. But the next morning, it was tied neatly around his wrist like a band. One evening, as a summer storm rolled low over the hills, Clara stood by the window, watching lightning flick across the distant sky. Weston entered quietly, shoulders damp from the rain, and set a small bundle of firewood beside the hearth. "You all right?" he asked. Clara nodded. I used to be so scared of thunder. When I was a girl." Weston knelt to stoke the fire. "You ain't a girl anymore." "No," she whispered, pressing a hand to her belly. "I'm about to be someone's mother." Weston looked up at her, slow and steady. "You'll be a good one." She met his eyes for a moment too long, and in the flicker of firelight, something passed between them. Not romance. Not yet. But something quieter. Recognition. A sense that neither of them had ever truly been seen before, until now. Morning haze had barely lifted off Dustwater Ridge when Clara felt the first kick beneath her ribs. She gasped, half laugh, half sob, and pressed both palms to her belly. "Easy there, little one," she whispered. Weston swung a hammer at the corral, muscles flexing under a cotton shirt. He glanced over. "She's saying good morning." Clara's cheeks warmed. "Still sure it's a girl?" "Sure as sunrise," he replied. That exchange felt like a promise. Someone expected her child with joy instead of dread. Joy, however, travels slower than gossip. Each supply run Weston made to town returned with sharper stares. One evening he laid a sealed envelope on the table. Came through the post. Clara read her father's rigid hand. "Clara, you were taken from me. I'm coming on the feist. Make yourself ready. Thomas Mayfield." "His coming," she whispered. Weston's jaw tightened. "Let him." She sank onto a chair. "He'll bring men. Then I'll stand taller." That night Clara lay awake, listening to the wind comb through prairie grass. Memories crept in, her father's voice quoting scripture about obedience, her mother's gentle corrections that never softened his edges. She remembered the day the town midwife confirmed her condition. Thomas had smashed a lantern, sparks jumping like angry fireflies. He'd called her body a curse, her baby a stain. Shame had wrapped her like barbed wire ever since. Weston's cabin walls smelled of cedar and linseed oil. Moonlight pooled on the floorboards, silvering the scar on Weston's sleeping shoulder. She realized she had never seen a man rest so lightly, every sense tuned to danger even while his eyes were closed. He carried his own ghosts, but none of them bore her name. The next days Weston shod gates, checked rifles, stacked blankets. He said it was for the baby, but Clara knew defense when she saw it. After a dizzy spell, he made her rest. He knelt, brushing hair from her forehead. "Your work is staying safe. Why do you care?" He guided her hand to an old scar across his chest. "Pa gave me this when I was 12 for dropping nails. I swore no one would bleed on my land again." He closed her fingers over the scar. "You won't either." Tears spilled. She pressed his hand to her cheek. 3 days before the first, Weston began carving something from a block of juniper. Clara watched from the rocker, curious. Shavings drifted like snow onto his boots. By dusk a small cradle took shape. Smooth rails, sturdy legs, no fancy scrollwork, craftsmanship. "Why now?" she asked. "Babies don't wait for perfect times," he said. "Figure yours deserves a proper start." She touched the unfinished wood. "I've never owned anything made just for me." "It's for her," Weston corrected with a faint smile, "but she'll share." Clara laughed, a sound that startled them both. Weston looked pleased at the music of it. The next morning they tested the cradle's rock on the porch. Clara felt the baby shift as if sensing her first bed. Weston noted her wince. Pain. Only a stitch. She exhaled slowly. I'm heavier every hour. Weston fetched a bucket, knelt, and soaked her swollen feet. Cool water, gentle scrubbing, rough hands surprisingly tender. Clara closed her eyes against tears of relief. You don't have to. I do, he said. You're carrying 2 souls right now. Least I can manage is your feet. When he dried her skin with a soft cloth, she caught herself imagining those hands holding her child, yet the picture felt right. The final evening of the month settled hot and still. Cicadas droned. Clara rocked on the porch. Weston sharpened a Bowie knife. I'm afraid, she said. Fear means your body's ready to fight, he answered. I don't want anyone hurt. I'll ask for peace first, he promised. That night he laid a hand on her belly. Rest. Stay close. Always. Dawn broke red, rude. Hoofbeats thundered up the track. Clara saw her father first, in the saddle, armed men flanking him. Weston, she called. He was already on the porch, hat, bare chest as door. Rifle rested calmly in one hand. Thomas reined in at the gate. I'm here for my daughter. Bring her out. She's where she chooses to be, Weston replied. She's pregnant with sin, Thomas barked. Clara stepped beside Weston, heart hammering. Papa. Thomas's eyes flicked to her belly. You look worse than rumor. Pain bloomed behind her ribs. Weston shifted, blocking her. Thomas signaled. The armed men dismounted, rifles rising. Nobody raises guns on my ground, Weston warned. Step aside, one man said. Weston didn't. If she won't come, we'll take the brat when it's born, Thomas snarled. Clara swayed. Weston's arm shot back, steadying her. He lifted the rifle barrel, not aiming, just reminding. Last chance. A hired gun cocked his weapon. Weston's shot cracked first. Dirt exploded inches before the man's boots. Horses reared. The gunman stumbled. Not worth it, the second muttered, mounting fast. Thomas paled. You'd shoot over her. I'll shoot to keep peace, Weston answered. Peace means you leave. Thomas glared, then wheeled his horse. Dust swallowed them. Silence. Clara's breath shook. You all right? Weston asked. She nodded, tears flowing. He said he'd take the baby. He won't. Inside, Weston poured water, knelt as she drank. I never wanted blood, she whispered. Protection sometimes looks like strength. She brushed his shoulder with trembling fingers. Thank you. He covered her hand with his. Storms passed. Sunline broke through clouds. For the first time, Clara believed it might stay, but her father's wounded pride could still return. Inside her womb, the baby kicked, reminding her the hardest labor lay ahead. Clara whispered to the life inside, We safe, little one. Safe, for now. The barn was warm, firelight flickering against the wooden beams, shadows dancing across the walls like memories too stubborn to die. Outside, the wind howled across the hills of Dustwater Ridge, but inside Clara Mayfield was cocooned in something she never expected. Safety. Kindness. A man's steady presence. Weston knelt beside her with a towel, his giant hands blotting her forehead with care that was both unfamiliar and overwhelming. Her contractions came sharp now, her breath catching with each wave. She gripped the wool blanket beneath her and whimpered. You're all right, Weston murmured. You're safe here, Clara. Just look at me. She did. Through tears and pain, she looked into the deep blue of his eyes. In them was something that had never once lived in her father's. Not duty, not shame, but tenderness. Real and raw. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, he said. But you've already done the hardest part, Clara. You survived them. Now you just have to meet the little soul who's been waiting for you. A shuddering sob slipped from her lips, more from relief than pain. And in that moment, Something broke loose in her. Not her water, that had come earlier, but the final thread of guilt sewn into her soul by the man who gave her life and then gave her away. She wasn't worthless. She wasn't broken. She wasn't a burden. She was a mother. The birth was long, and hard, and raw. Weston never left her side. Not once. He held her hand when she screamed, wiped her tears when she wept, and wrapped his arms around her when it was over, when the barn filled with the first wild, fierce cry of a newborn. "A girl," Weston said, voice thick. "You've got yourself a strong little girl." Clara stared at the bundle in his arms, soft pink skin, wisps of dark hair, 2 fists balled up against her chin. She couldn't breathe for a moment, couldn't believe this was real. "She's perfect," Clara breathed. "You did that," Weston said, gently handing her the baby. "You brought her hay. You carried her, and you didn't give up. No one else gets to define you anymore, Clara. Not your daddy, not this town. Just you and her." Clara cried then, not from shame, but joy. Her arms, so often mocked for their size, now held the most precious weight in the world. 3 days passed before word got out that Thomas Mayfield's daughter had delivered safely under the roof of Weston Blackridge, the man he thought would be her punishment. Thomas arrived at dusk, riding up to Weston's barn like a ghost from another life. He didn't bother to knock, just stormed in, eyes bloodshot and jaw clenched. "I want to see my daughter," he growled. Weston stood from the table slowly. "She's restin'. You can talk to her if she's ready to talk." "I didn't give her to you to coddle, Blackridge," Thomas snapped. "She's still mine." "No, sir," Weston said, calm but cold. "You gave her away, and you don't get to pick and choose what happens after." Clara stepped into the room, baby in her arms. Her dress hung loose around her soft frame, and her cheeks were still round with exhaustion, but her eyes were different now. Steady, focused. "I'll talk," she said, "but not as your daughter. As myself." Thomas turned to her. "You're embarrassing me, Clara. Coming back into town with a bastard child. Letting this man pretend he's your husband." "I'd rather be the wife of a man who treated me like a person," she said, voice shaking but strong, "than the daughter of a man who treated me like a mistake." Thomas blinked, as if, for the first time, the size of the shame wasn't on her body, but on his soul. "I did what I had to do." "No," she interrupted. "You did what made you feel better. You gave me away because I reminded you of your failure, not mine." The baby stirred, and Weston stepped forward, placing one large hand on Clara's back. "She don't need to explain herself to you," he said. "You can leave now." Thomas opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. There was no threat he could make that meant anything now, so he turned, hat in hand, and left. He didn't look back. Months passed. Winter bled into spring, and Dustwater Ridge softened with the warming earth. The town changed too, a little at first, and then more. They saw the big man from the hills riding into town with a baby strapped to his chest and an obese young woman on his arm, laughing with a lightness nobody thought she could carry. They still whispered. People always do. But they whispered less, because they saw her strength now, her smile, and they saw the way Weston looked at her like she hung the damn stars. They saw what love looked like when it wasn't wrapped in thin bodies or polished reputations, but in arms wide enough to hold you at your worst and shoulders broad enough to carry what others discarded. Clara became a wife before summer, barefoot in the wildflower field behind the barn, her dress wrapped lovingly around her hips, and her baby girl giggling in Weston's arms. She kissed him slow and deep when the preacher said, "You may," and in that kiss was a whole life reclaimed. Not a punishment, not a shame, a beginning.